1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. Book 2, Chapter 2. Tango. I don't have a thing except my soul. He set his recording of Janacek's Sinfonietta on the turntable and pressed the autoplay button. Seiji Ozawa conducting the Chicago Symphony. The turntable started to spin at 33 1/3 RPM. The tone arm moved over the edge of the record, and the needle traced the groove. Following the brass introduction, the ornate timpani resounded from the speakers. It was the section that Tango liked best. While listening to the music, Tango faced the screen of his word processor and typed in characters. It was a daily habit of his to listen to Janacek's Sinfonietta early in the morning. The piece had retained a special significance for him ever since he performed it as an impromptu high school percussionist. It gave him a sense of personal encouragement and protection, or at least he felt that it did. He sometimes listened to Janacek's Sinfonietta with his older girlfriend. Not bad, she would say, but she liked old jazz records more than classical. The older, the better. It was an odd taste for a woman her age. Her favorite record was a collection of W.C. Handy blues songs, performed by the young Louis Armstrong, with Barney Biggard on clarinet and Trummy Young on trombone. She gave Tango a copy, though less for him than for herself to listen to. After sex, they would often lie in bed listening to the record. She never tired of it. Armstrong's trumpet and singing are absolutely wonderful, of course, but if you ask me, the thing you should concentrate on is Barney Biggard's clarinet, she would say. Yet the actual number of Biggard solos on the record was small, and they tended to be limited to a single chorus. Louis Armstrong was the star of this record, but she obviously loved those few Biggard solos, the way she would quietly hum along with every memorized note. She said she supposed there might be more talented jazz clarinetists than Barney Biggard, but you couldn't find another one who could play with such warmth and delicacy. His best performances always gave rise to a particular mental image. Tango could not, off the top of his head, name any other jazz clarinetists, but as he listened to this record over and over, he began to appreciate the sheer, unforced beauty of its clarinet performances, their richly nourishing and imaginative qualities. He had to listen closely and repeatedly for this to happen, and he had to have a capable guide. He would have missed the nuances on his own. His girlfriend once said, "Barney Biggard plays beautifully, like a gifted second baseman. His solos are marvelous, but where he really shines is in the backup he gives the other musicians. That is so hard, but he does it like it's nothing at all. Only an attentive listener can fully appreciate his true worth." Whenever the sixth tune on the flip side of the LP, Atlanta Blues, began, she would grab one of Tango's body parts and praise Biggard's concise, exquisite solo, which was sandwiched between Armstrong's song and his trumpet solo. "Listen to that! Amazing! That first long wail like a little child's cry. What is it? Surprise? Overflowing joy? An appeal to happiness? It turns into a joyful sigh and weaves its way through a beautiful river of sound until it's smoothly absorbed into some perfect, unknowable place. There, listen. Nobody else can play such thrilling solos. Jimmy No One, Sidney Bechet, Pee Wee Russell, Benny Goodman, they're all great clarinetists, but none of them can create such perfectly sculptured works of art. How come you know so much about old-time jazz? Tango once asked. I have lots of past lives that you don't know anything about. Past lives that no one can change in any way, she said, gently massaging Tango's scrotum with the palm of her hand. When he was finished writing for the morning, Tango walked to the station and bought a paper at the newsstand. This he carried into a nearby cafe, where he ordered a morning set of buttered toast and hard-boiled egg. He drank coffee and opened the paper while waiting for his food to come. As Komatsu had predicted, there was an article about fuka-eri on the human interest page. Not very large, the article appeared above an ad for Mitsubishi automobiles, under the headline, Popular High School Girl Writer Runaway. Fuka-eri, pen name of Eriko Fukada, 17, author of the current bestseller Air Crystallis, has been listed as missing. It was revealed yesterday afternoon. According to her guardian cultural anthropologist Takayuki Ebisuno, 63, who filed the search request with the Oume police station, Eriko has failed to return either to her home in Oume City or to her Tokyo apartment since the night of June 27. And there has been no word from her since then. In response to this newspaper's telephone inquiry, Mr. Ebisuno said that Eriko was in her usual good spirits when he last saw her, that he could think of no reason she would want to go into hiding, that she had never once failed to come home without permission, and that he is worried something might have happened to her. The editor in charge of Air Crystallis at the *** publishing company, Yuji Komatsu, said, The book has been at the top of the bestseller list for 6 straight weeks and has garnered a great deal of attention. But Miss Fukada herself has not wanted to make public appearances. We at the company have been unable to determine whether her current disappearance might have something to do with her attitude toward such matters. While young Miss Fukada is an author with abundant talent from whom much can be expected in the future, we hope that she reappears in good health as soon as possible. The police investigation is proceeding with several possible leads in view. That was probably as much as the newspaper could say at this stage, Tango concluded. If they gave it a more sensational treatment, and fuka-eri showed up at home 2 days later, as if nothing had happened, the reporter who wrote the article would be embarrassed, and the newspaper itself would lose face. The same was true for the police. Both issued brief, neutral statements like weather balloons to see what would happen. The story would turn big once the weekly magazines got a hold of it and the TV news shows turned up the volume. They would not happen for a few more days. Sooner or later, though, things would heat up. That was for certain. A sensation was inevitable. There were probably only 4 people in the world who knew that she had not been abducted, but was lying low somewhere, alone. Fuka-eri herself knew it, of course, and Tango knew it. Professor Ebisuno and his daughter Azami also knew it. No one else knew that the fuss over her disappearance was a hoax meant to attract broad attention. Tango could not decide whether his knowledge of the truth was something he should be pleased or upset about. Pleased, probably. At least he didn't have to worry about Fuka-eri's welfare. She was in a safe place. At the same time, it was also clear that Tango was complicit in this complicated plot. Professor Ebisuno was using it as a lever in order to pry up any ominous boulder and let the sunlight in. Then he would wait to see what crawled out from under the rock, and Tango was being forced to stand right next to him. Tango did not want to know what would crawl out from under the rock. He would prefer not to see it. It was bound to be a huge source of trouble, but he sensed he would have no choice but to look. After he had drunk his coffee and eaten his toast and eggs, Tango exited the cafe, leaving his rumpled newspaper behind. He went back to his apartment, brushed his teeth, showered, and prepared to leave for school. During the noon break at cram school, Tango had a strange visitor. He had just finished his morning class and was reading a few of the day's newspapers in the teacher's lounge when the school director's secretary approached him and said there was someone who wanted to see him. The secretary was a capable woman 1 year older than Tango, who, in spite of her title, handled virtually all of the school's administrative business. Her facial features were a bit too irregular for her to be considered beautiful, but she had a nice figure and marvelous taste in clothes. "He says his name is Mr. Ushikawa." Tango did not recognize the name. For some reason, a slight frown crossed her face. "He says he has something important to discuss with you and wants to see you alone, if possible." "Something important?" Tango asked, taken aback. No one ever brought him something important to discuss at the cram school. "The reception room was empty, so I showed him in there. Teachers aren't supposed to use that room without permission, but I figured." "Thanks very much," Tango said, and gave her his best smile. Unimpressed, she hurried off somewhere, the hem of her new Agnes B summer jacket flapping in the breeze. Ushikawa was a short man, probably in his mid-40s. His trunk had already filled out so that it had lost all signs of a waist, and excess flesh was gathering at his throat. But Tango could not be sure of his age. Owing to the peculiarity or the uncommonness of his appearance, the clues necessary for guessing his age were difficult to find. He could have been older than that, or he could have been younger, anywhere between, say, 32 and 56. His teeth were crooked and his spine was strangely curved. The large crown of his head formed an abnormally flat, bald area with lopsided edges. It was reminiscent of a military heliport that had been made by cutting away the peak of a small, strategically important hill. Tango had seen such a heliport in a Vietnam War documentary. Around the borders of the flat, lopsided area of his head clung thick, black, curly hair that had been allowed to grow too long, hanging down shaggily over the man's ears. 98 people out of 100 would probably be reminded by it of pubic hair. People had no idea what the other two would think. Everything about the man, his face, his body, seemed to have been formed asymmetrically. Tango noticed this right away. Of course, all people's bodies are asymmetrical to some extent. That in itself was not contrary to the laws of nature. Tango himself was aware that his own 2 eyelids had slightly different shapes, and his left testicle hung slightly lower than the right one. Our bodies are not mass-produced in a factory according to fixed standards. But in this man's case, the differences between right and left were far beyond the bounds of common sense. This imbalance, obvious to any observer, could not help but annoy those in his presence and cause them the same kind of discomfort they would feel in front of a funhouse mirror. The man's grey suit had countless tiny wrinkles, which made it look like an expanse of earth that had been ground down by a glacier. One flap of his white dress shirt's collar was sticking out, and the knot of his tie was contorted, as if it had twisted itself from the sheer discomfort of having to exist in that place. The suit, the shirt, and the tie were all slightly wrong in size. The pattern on his tie might have been an inept art student's impressionistic rendering of a bowl of tangled, soggy noodles. Each piece of clothing filled an immediate need, but the longer Tango studied them, the sorrier he felt for the clothes themselves, for having to be worn by this man. Tango paid little attention to his own clothing, but he was strangely concerned about the clothing worn by others. If he had to compile a list of the worst dressers he had met in the past 10 years, this man would be somewhere near the top. It was not just that he had terrible style. He also gave the impression that he was deliberately desecrating the very idea of wearing clothes. When Tango entered the reception room, the man stood and produced a business card from his card case, handing it to Tango with a bow. Toshiharu Ushikawa, it said in both Japanese characters and Roman script. An ordinary enough first name, but Ushikawa? Bull River? Tango had never seen that one before. The card further identified the man as full-time director, New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts, located downtown in Kojimachi, Chiyoda Ward, and gave the foundation's telephone number. Tango had no idea what kind of organization the New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts might be, nor what it meant to be a full-time director of anything. The business card, though, was a handsome one, with an embossed logo, not a makeshift item. Tango studied it for several moments before looking at the man again. He felt sure there could not be many people in the world whose appearance was so out of keeping with the grandiose title Full-Time Director, New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts. They sat in easy chairs on opposite sides of a low table and looked at each other. The man gave his sweaty forehead a few vigorous rubs with a handkerchief, and returned the pitiful cloth to his jacket pocket. The receptionist brought in 2 cups of green tea on a tray. Tango thanked her as she left. Ushigawa said nothing to her, but to Tango he said, "Please forgive me for interrupting your break and for arriving without having first made an appointment." The words themselves were polite and formal enough, but his tone was strangely colloquial, and Tango found it almost offensive. "Have you finished lunch? If you like, we could go out and talk over a meal." "I don't eat lunch when I'm working," Tango said. "I'll have something light after my afternoon class, so don't worry." "I see. Well then, with your permission, I'll tell you what I have in mind, and we can discuss it here. This seems like a nice, quiet place where we can talk without interruption." He surveyed the reception room as though appraising its value. There was nothing special about the room. It had one big oil painting hanging on the wall, a picture of some mountain, more impressive for the weight of its paint than anything else. A vase had an arrangement of flowers resembling dahlias, dull blossoms reminiscent of a slow-witted matron. Tango wondered why a cram school would keep such a gloomy reception room. "Let me belatedly introduce myself. As you can see from the card, my name is Ishigawa. My friends all call me Ushi, never Ushikawa, just plain old Ushi, as if I were a bull," Ushikawa said, smiling. "Friends?" Tango wondered, out of pure curiosity. What kind of person would ever want to be this man's friend? On first impression, Ushikawa honestly made Tango think of some creepy thing that had crawled out of a hole in the earth. A slimy thing of uncertain shape that in fact was not supposed to come out into the light. He might conceivably be one of those things that Professor Ebisuno had lured out from under a rock. Tango unconsciously wrinkled his brow and placed the business card, which was still in his hand, on the table. Toshiharu Ushikawa. That was this man's name.
I'm sure that you are a very busy man, Mr. Kawana. So with your permission, I will abbreviate any preliminary background and proceed directly to the heart of the matter,
Ushikawa said. Tango answered with a little nod. Ushikawa took a sip of tea and launched into the business at hand.
You have probably never heard of the New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts, Mr. Kawana.
Tango nodded.
We're a relatively new foundation that concentrates on selecting and supporting young people, especially those young people who are not yet widely known, who are engaged in original activity in the fields of scholarship and the arts. In other words, our aim is to nourish the budding youth who will carry the next generation on their shoulders in all fields of Japan's contemporary culture. We contract with specialists to propose candidates for us in each category. We choose 5 artists and scholars each year and provide them with grants. They can do anything they like for 1 year, no strings attached. All we ask is that they submit a simple report at the end of their year, a mere formality outlining their activities and results to be included in the Foundation's magazine. Nothing more burdensome than that. We have just begun this activity, so the important thing for us is to produce tangible results. We are, in other words, still in the seed planting stage. In concrete terms, what this means is that we will provide each recipient with an annual stipend of 3 million yen.
Very generous, Tango said.
It takes both time and money to build up or discover something important. Of course, time and money are not in themselves a guarantee of great results, but they can't hurt. The total amount of time available is especially limited. The clock is ticking as we speak. Time rushes past. Opportunities are lost right and left. If you have money, you can buy time. You can even buy freedom if you want. Time and freedom. Those are the most important things that people can buy with money.
Hearing this, Tango almost reflexively glanced at his watch. True, time was ticking past without a let-up.
Sorry for taking so much of your time,
Ushikawa added, obviously interpreting Tango's gesture as a demonstration of its own argument.
Let me be quick about this. These days, of course, a mere 3 million yen is not going to enable a lavish lifestyle, but it ought to help a young person pay the bills very nicely, which is our basic purpose, to make it possible for recipients to spend a full year concentrating on their research or creative projects without struggling to support themselves. And if the governing board determines at the end of the year evaluation that the person produced noteworthy results during the period, the possibility remains for the stipend to be extended beyond the single year.
Tango said nothing, but waited for Ushikawa to continue.
The other day, I took the liberty of listening to you lecture for a full hour here at the cram school, Mr. Kawana. Believe me, I found it very interesting. I am a total outsider when it comes to mathematics, or should I say, I've always been terrible at it, and absolutely hated math class in school. I just had to hear the word mathematics to start writhing in agony, and to run away as far as I could. But your lecture, Mr. Kawana, was utterly enjoyable. Of course, I didn't understand a thing about the logic of calculus, but just listening to you speak about it, I thought, if it's really so interesting, I ought to start studying math. You can be proud of yourself. You have a special talent. A talent for drawing people in, should I say. I had heard you were a popular teacher, and I could see why.
Tango had no idea when and where Ushikawa could have heard him lecture. He always paid close attention to who was in the room when he was teaching, and though he had not memorized every student's face, he could never have missed anyone as strange-looking as Ushikawa, who would have stood out like a centipede in a sugar bowl. He decided not to pursue the matter, however, which would only have prolonged a conversation that was already too long. As you know, Mr. Ushikawa, I'm just an employee here. Somebody the cram school hires to teach a few courses, Tango began, anxious to waste as little time as possible. I don't do any original research in mathematics. I just take knowledge that is already out there and explain it to students as simply and entertainingly as I can. All I'm doing is teaching them more effective methods for solving problems on college placement tests. I may have a certain talent for that, but I gave up the idea of being a professional researcher in the field a long time ago. For one thing, I couldn't afford to stay in school any longer, and I never thought I had the aptitude or the ability to make a name for myself in the academic world. In that sense, I'm just not the kind of person you're looking for. Ushikawa hurriedly raised his hand.
No, that's not what I'm getting at all. I'm sorry, I might have made this more complicated than it has to be. It's true that your math lectures are interesting and unique and original, but I didn't come here today about that. What we have our eye on, Mr. Kawana, is your activity as a novelist.
Tango was so unprepared for this that he was momentarily at a loss for words.
My activity as a novelist? Exactly.
I don't understand. It's true I've been writing fiction for several years, but nothing of mine has ever been published. You can't call someone like that a novelist. How could I possibly attract your attention? At Tango's reaction, Ushikawa smiled in great delight, revealing a mouthful of horribly crooked teeth. Like seaside pilings that had been hit by huge waves, they pointed off in all directions and were befouled in a great many ways. They were surely beyond help from orthodontia, but someone should at least teach him how to brush his teeth properly, Tango thought.
That's what makes our foundation unique,
Ushikawa said proudly.
The researchers we contract with take note of things that other people have yet to notice. This is one of our goals. As you say, none of your work has been properly published, and we are quite aware of that. But we also know that under a pen name you have entered various literary magazines, new writers' competitions almost every year. You have not won yet, unfortunately, but a few times your work made it through to the last stage of the screening process, so that, quite naturally, a not inconsiderable number of people got to read them, and several of those people took note of your talent. Our researcher has concluded that you are certain to win a New Writers Award in the near future, and make your debut as a writer. Investing in futures would be a rather crude way to put it, but as I said before, our aim is to nourish the budding youth who will carry the next generation on their shoulders.
Tango picked up his cup and took a drink of his tea, which by now was somewhat cool. So, what you're saying is that I'm a candidate for a grant as a fledgling novelist, is that it?
That is it, exactly. Except that you're not so much a candidate as a finalist. If you say that you're willing to accept the grant, then I am authorized to finalize the arrangements. If you will be so good as to sign the necessary documents, the 3 million yen will be transferred electronically into your bank account immediately. you will be able to take 6 months or a year's leave from this cram school and devote all your energies to writing. We have heard that you are presently writing a long novel. This would be a perfect opportunity, don't you think?
How do you know I'm writing a long novel? Tango asked with a frown. Ushikawa gave him another toothy grin, but upon closer inspection, Tango realized that his eyes were not smiling at all. The glow from them was icy cold.
Our researchers are eager and capable. They choose a number of candidates and examine them from every angle. Probably a few people around you know that you're writing a novel. Word gets out.
Komatsu knew he was writing a novel, and so did his older girlfriend. Was there anybody else? Probably not. I'd like to ask a few things about your foundation, Tango said.
Please do. Ask anything at all.
Where does it get the money it needs to operate?
From a certain individual, or you might say from an organization of his. Realistically speaking, just between us, it also serves as one of his many tax write-offs. Of course, quite aside from that, this individual has a deep interest in scholarship and the arts, and he wants to support members of the younger generation. I can't go into any more detail here. The person wishes to remain anonymous, and that includes his organization as well. All day-to-day operations are entrusted to the Foundation's committee, of which yours truly is, for now, a member.
Tango thought about this for a moment, but there really wasn't that much to think about. All he did was put the things that Ushikawa had told him in order.
Would you mind very much if I smoked?
Ushikawa asked. Not at all, Tango said, pushing a heavy glass ashtray in his direction. Ushikawa took a box of 7 Stars cigarettes from his breast pocket, put a cigarette in his mouth, and lit it with a gold lighter. The lighter was slim and expensive looking.
So, what do you say, Mr. Kawana?
Ushikawa asked.
Would you do us the honor of accepting our grant? Speaking for myself, quite honestly, after having heard your delightful lecture, I am very much looking forward to seeing what kind of world you go on to create in your literature.
I am grateful to you for bringing me this offer, Tango said. It's far more than I deserve, but I'm afraid I can't accept it. Smoke rose from the cigarette between Ushikawa's fingers. He looked at Tango with his eyes narrowed.
By what you mean?
First of all, I don't like the idea of taking money from people I hardly know. Secondly, as things stand now, I don't really need the money. I have managed well enough so far by teaching 3 days a week at the cram school and using the other days to concentrate on my writing. I'm not ready to change that lifestyle. Thirdly, Mr. Ushikawa, I personally don't want to have anything to do with you. Fourthly, no matter how you look at it, there's something fishy about this grant. It just sounds too good to be true. There's something going on behind the scenes. I certainly don't have the best intuition in the world, but I can tell that much from the smell. Tango, of course, said none of this.
I see,
Ushikawa said, filling his lungs with cigarette smoke and exhaling with a look of deep satisfaction.
I see. I think, in my own way, I understand your view of the matter. What you say is quite logical. But really, Mr. Kawana, there is no need for you to give me your answer right away. Why don't you go home and take a good 2 or 3 days to think it over? Take more time to reach your conclusion. We're not in a hurry. It's not a bad offer.
Tango gave his head a decisive shake. Thank you, that's very kind, but it will save us both a lot of time and trouble if we reach a final decision today. I am honored to have been nominated for a grant, and I'm sorry to have to put you to the trouble of making a special trip here, but I'm afraid I will have to decline. This is my final conclusion, and there is no possibility that I would reconsider. Ushikawa nodded a few times and regretfully used the ashtray to crush out the cigarette, from which he had taken only 2 puffs.
That's fine, Mr. Kawana. I see where you are coming from, and I want to respect your wishes. I am sorry for having taken up your time. It's unfortunate, but I will have to resign myself to it. I will be going now.
But Ushikawa showed no sign of standing up. He simply treated the back of his head to a thorough scratching and looked at Tango with narrowed eyes.
However, Mr. Kawana, you yourself may not be aware of it, but people are expecting great things from you as a writer. You have talent. Mathematics and literature probably have no direct connection, but listening to you lecture on mathematics is like listening to someone tell a story. This is not something that any ordinary person can do. You have something special that needs to be told. That is clear even in the likes of me. So be sure to take care of yourself. Forgive me if I am being over-solicitous, but please try not to become embroiled in extraneous matters, and make up your mind to walk straight down your own path in life.
Extraneous matters? Tango asked.
For example, you seem to have, how should I put this, some sort of connection to Miss Eriko Fukada, the author of Air Crystallis. Or, at least, you have met her a few times, am I correct? By coincidence, I just happened to read in today's paper that she has apparently disappeared. The media will have a field day with this delicious item, I'm sure.
Assuming I have met Eriko Fukada, is that supposed to mean something? Again, Ushikawa raised his hand to stop Tango. It was a small hand, but the fingers were short and stubby.
Now, please don't get worked up over this. I don't mean any harm. All I am trying to say is that selling off one's talents and time in dribs and drabs to make ends meet never produces good results. It may sound presumptuous of me to say this, but your talent is a genuine diamond in the rough, and I don't want to see it wasted and ruined on pointless things. If the relationship between you and Miss Fukada becomes public knowledge, Mr. Kawana, someone is bound to seek you out at home. They'll start stalking you, and they'll turn up all kinds of half-truths. They're a persistent bunch.
Tango stared at Ushikawa, saying nothing. Ushikawa narrowed his eyes and started scratching one of his big earlobes. The ears themselves were small, but Ushikawa's earlobes were strangely big. Ushikawa's physical oddities were an unending source of fascination.
Now, don't get the wrong idea. My lips are sealed,
Ushikawa said, gesturing as if zipping his mouth closed.
I promise you that. I may not look it, but I know how to keep a secret. People say I must have been a clam in a previous life. I'll keep this matter locked up inside, as a sign of my personal regard for you. No one else will know.
Finally, he stood up and made several attempts to smooth out the tiny wrinkles in his suit, but succeeded only in making them more obvious.
If you should change your mind about the grant, please call the number on my card whenever you feel like it. There is still plenty of time. If this year is no good for you, well, there's always next year.
With raised index fingers, Ushikawa mimed the earth revolving around the sun.
We are in no hurry. At least I succeeded in meeting you with having this little talk with you, and I believe that you have gotten our message.
After one more smile, all but flaunting his ruined dentition, Ushikawa turned and left the reception room. Tango used the time until his next class to think through Ushikawa's remarks in his head. The man seemed to know that Tango had participated in the rewrite of Air Crystallis. There were hints of it everywhere in his speech. All I'm trying to say is that selling off one's talents and time in dribs and drabs to make ends meet never produces good results, Ushikawa had said pointedly. We know. Surely that was a message. I succeeded in meeting you and having this little talk with you, and I believe that you have gotten our message. Could they have dispatched Ushikawa to see Tango and offer him the 3 million yen grant for no other purpose than to deliver this message? No, it didn't make sense. There was no need for them to devise such an elaborate plot. They already knew where he was weakest. If they had wanted to threaten Tango, all they had to do was bring out the facts. Or were they trying to buy him off with the grant? It was all too dramatic. And who were they, after all? Was the New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and Arts connected with Sakigake? Did it even exist? Tango went to see the secretary, carrying Ushikawa's business card. I need to ask you to do me another favor, he said. What would that be? She asked, remaining seated at her desk and looking up at Tango. I'd like you to call this number and ask if they're the New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts. Also, ask whether this director, Mr. Ushikawa, is in. They'll probably say he's not there, so ask when he's due back in the office. If they ask your name, just make something up. I'd do it myself, except it might be a problem if they recognize my voice. The secretary dialed the numbers, and a standard back and forth ensued. A concise exchange between two professionals. When it ended, the secretary reported to Tango. The New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts does exist. A woman answered, probably in her early 20s, a normal receptionist. Mr. Ushikawa actually works there. He's supposed to be back around 3:30. She didn't ask my name, which I certainly would have done. Of course, Tango said. Anyhow, thanks. You're welcome, she said, handing Ushikawa's card back to Tango. Is this Mr. Ushikawa the person who came to see you? That's him. I barely looked at him, but he's kind of creepy. Tango put the card into his wallet. I suspect that impression wouldn't change even if you had more time to look at him, he said. I always tell myself not to judge people by their appearance. I've been wrong in the past and had some serious regrets. But the minute I saw this man, I got the feeling he couldn't be trusted. I still feel that way. You're not alone, Tango said. I'm not alone, she echoed, as if to confirm the grammatical accuracy of Tango's sentence. That's a beautiful jacket you're wearing, Tango said, meaning it quite honestly. He wasn't just flattering her. After Ushikawa's crumpled heap of a suit, her stylishly cut linen jacket looked like a lovely piece of fabric that had descended from heaven on a windless afternoon. Thank you, she said. But just because somebody answered the phone, it doesn't necessarily mean that the New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts actually exists. That's true. It could be an elaborate ruse. You just have to put in a phone line and hire somebody to answer it, like the Sting. But why would they go to all that trouble? Forgive me, Tango, but you don't look like somebody who'd have enough money to squeeze out of you. I don't have a thing, Tango said, except my soul. Sounds like a job for Mephistopheles, she said. Maybe I should walk over to this address and see if there's really an office there. Tell me what you find out, she said, inspecting her manicure with narrowed eyes. The New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts actually existed. After class, Tango took the subway to Yotsuya and walked to Kojimachi. At the address on Ushikawa's card, he found a 4-story building with a metal nameplate by the front entrance. New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts. The office was on the 3rd floor. Also on that floor were Makimoto Music Publishers and Koda Accountants. Judging from the scale of the building, none of them could be very big offices. None appeared to be flourishing either, though their true condition was impossible to judge from outside. Tango considered taking the elevator to the floor. He wanted to see what kind of office it was, or at least what its door looked like. But things could prove awkward if he ran into Ishikawa in the hallway. Tango took another subway home and called Komatsu's office. For a change, Komatsu was in, and he came to the phone right away. I can't talk right now, Komatsu said, speaking more quickly than usual, his tone of voice somewhat higher than normal. Sorry, but I don't think I can talk about anything here right now. This is very important, Tango said. A very strange guy came to see me at school today. He seemed to know something about my connection with Air Crystallis. Komatsu went silent for a few seconds at his end. I think I can call you in 20 minutes. Are you at home? Tango said that he was. Komatsu hung up. While he waited for Komatsu to call, Tango sharpened 2 kitchen knives on a wet stone, boiled water, and poured himself some tea. The phone rang exactly 20 minutes later, which was again unusual for Komatsu. This time, Komatsu sounded far calmer than he had before. He seemed to be phoning from a quieter place. Tango gave him a condensed account of what Ushikawa had said in the reception room. The New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts. Never heard of it. And that 3 million yen grant for you is hard to figure too. I agree, of course, that you have a great future as a writer, but you still haven't published anything. It's kind of incredible. They've got some ulterior motive. That's what I thought. Give me a little time. I'll find out what I can about the New Japan Foundation for the Advancement of Scholarship and the Arts. I'll get in touch with you if I learn anything. But this Ushikawa guy knows you're connected with fuka-eri, huh? Looks that way. That's a bit of a problem. Something's starting to happen, Tango said. It's fine that Professor Ebisuno managed to pry up his rock, but some kind of monster seems to have crawled out from underneath. Komatsu sighed into the phone. It's coming after me, too. The weekly magazines are going crazy, and the TV guys are poking around. This morning the cops came to the office to question me. They've already latched on to the connection between fuka-eri and Sakigake, and of course the disappearance of her parents. The media will start blowing up that angle too. What's Professor Ebisuno doing? Nobody's able to get in touch with him for a while. Phone calls don't go through, and he doesn't get in touch with anybody. He may be having a tough time too. Or he could be working on another secret plan. Oh, by the way, to change the subject a bit, have you told anybody that I'm writing a long novel? Tango asked Komatsu. No, nobody, Komatsu responded immediately. Why would I tell anyone about that? That's okay then, just asking. Komatsu fell silent for a moment. Then he said, It's kind of late for me to be saying this, but we might have gotten ourselves into nasty territory. Whatever we've gotten ourselves into, There's no backing out now, that's for sure. And if we can't back out now, all we can do is keep going forward, even if you're right about that monster. Better fasten your seatbelt, Tango said. You said it, Komatsu said, and hung up. It had been a long day. Tango sat at the kitchen table, drinking his cold tea and thinking about fuka-eri. What could she be doing all day, locked up alone in her hiding place? Of course, no one ever knew what fuka-eri was doing. In her recorded message, fuka-eri had said that the little people's wisdom and power might cause harm to the professor and to Tango. Be careful in the forest. Tango found himself looking at his surroundings. True, the forest was their world. End of chapter.